The suitcase was still zipped when I noticed her phone was face down on the kitchen counter, screen dark, charging cord wrapped once around it like she'd tied it in place. My name is Adrian. I'm 41 years old. I've spent the last 16 years designing bridges and parking structures for a firm 2 towns over, and for 14 of those years I've been married to a woman named Melissa. That Tuesday in March, she came home from a 4-day sales conference in Columbus glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months, hair still curled from a blowout she definitely hadn't gotten in our bathroom, laughing at something on her phone before she even set her bag down. "Good trip?" I asked, and she looked up like she'd forgotten I was standing there. "Really good, actually," she said. "I think I finally figured out how to talk to the regional guys without sounding like I'm apologizing for existing." She kissed me on the cheek, quick, already moving toward the stairs with her suitcase wheels clacking against the hardwood. I stood in the kitchen a second longer than I needed to. Something about the kiss felt like a formality, a box checked. I told myself I was imagining it. I'd told myself that before. We live in Millbrook, a town where everyone knows which pharmacy has the shorter line and which diner does the better Sunday special, and where our 2 kids, Ella, 9, all elbows and opinions, and Sam, 6, who still asks me to check under his bed every single night, have grown up 2 streets from the elementary school. Melissa is a regional sales director for a medical supply company, the kind of job that used to mean 2 trips a year and now, somehow, means 1 every 6 weeks. I used to be proud of how far she'd climbed. Lately I just felt the empty side of the bed on the nights she was gone. That night, after the kids were down, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, not working, just scrolling, thumb moving in slow circles. I asked how the conference dinner went. She'd mentioned it briefly on the phone, some steakhouse downtown, half the regional team there. "It was fine," she said. "Long. You know how those things are." I didn't, actually. I'd never been to one of her conferences. In 14 years, I'd never once been invited, and it had never occurred to me to ask why. I want to be honest about something before I go any further, because it matters to everything that comes after. I am not a man who asks hard questions. I never have been. Growing up, my house was loud with things nobody said out loud, my father's drinking, my mother's silence about it, and somewhere in there I learned that peace was worth almost any price. So when something felt off with Melissa, my instinct wasn't to ask. It was to smile, nod, and quietly recalculate how many more years I had until the kids were grown and things would somehow sort themselves out on their own. She went up to shower around 10. I sat with the laptop she'd left open, not touching it, just looking at the blue light of the screensaver, feeling something I couldn't yet name pressing against my ribs from the inside. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever stood in your own kitchen, in a house you built a life inside of, and felt like a stranger had just walked past you wearing your wife's face, you already know what that felt like. Upstairs, the shower ran for a long time. Longer than usual. When she came down in her robe, hair wrapped in a towel, she noticed the laptop was still open and closed it a little too quickly, a little too casually, like she was catching herself mid-thought. "You didn't go through my stuff, did you?" she asked, half laughing. "Why would I?" I said. "No reason," she said. "Just checking. Just checking." I turned that phrase over in my head for the rest of the night, long after she'd fallen asleep beside me, her back to me, breathing slow, and even while I stared at the ceiling fan turning in lazy circles above our bed. The next morning, unpacking her suitcase for the wash, I found the receipt. Not hidden, tucked in the outer zip pocket where receipts always end up, crumpled, half illegible. A hotel bar. 2 drinks. 11:47 p.m. The conference schedule she'd shown me, the one still open in an email on the shared family calendar, had the closing dinner ending at 9. I stood there in our bedroom holding a slip of paper the size of a grocery receipt, and something in my chest went very quiet and very cold, the way a room goes quiet right before a storm actually breaks. I told myself it meant nothing. A nightcap with coworkers. Nothing more. I folded the receipt along its existing crease and put it back exactly where I'd found it, because some part of me, the part that had spent a whole childhood learning to leave things undisturbed, wasn't ready yet to know what I already half suspected. I didn't think about that receipt again for 3 days. I should have. Life kept moving the way it does, indifferent to the things you're not ready to look at. Monday I dropped Ella at school with her violin case banging against her knee. Tuesday I sat through a 3-hour meeting about load tolerances on a parking structure in Dayton, nodding at the right moments, thinking about a hotel bar receipt folded into a suitcase pocket 400 miles from anywhere. I didn't ask. Not because I didn't want to know, but because some part of me had already decided that not knowing was survivable, and knowing might not be. That was the shape of our days now. Melissa up early, running the kids through breakfast with the brisk efficiency of someone managing a small logistics operation, me trailing a half-step behind with lunches and backpacks. We'd built a life that ran on schedule and habit is a powerful anesthetic. You can live inside a marriage on autopilot for a long time before you notice you've stopped actually looking at the person next to you. Wednesday night she got a text at dinner. I saw her glance at it, flip the phone face down against the tablecloth without reading it out loud like she usually did. Oh, that's just Kara asking about Mom's birthday, and keep eating like nothing had happened. Who was that? I asked, aiming for casual. Work thing, she said. Nothing exciting. Sam asked for more macaroni. Ella wanted to know why we couldn't get a dog. The moment passed the way moments do at a dinner table with children in it, swallowed by the ordinary noise of family life, and I let it pass too, because some part of me was grateful for the noise. It gave me somewhere else to look. Later I want to say I noticed the pattern take shape, the phone face down more often now, angled slightly away from me on the counter, in her hand a half-second longer before she set it down. But at the time, none of it registered as pattern. It registered as static. Small, forgettable, the kind of thing you notice and then don't, the way you stop hearing a clock ticking in a room you sit in every day. She told me, much later, what those weeks had actually felt like from her side of things. This is what she was living through, though I had no idea at the time. I told myself it was just this once. That's what I said in my head, standing in that hotel hallway with my shoes still on, my heart going too fast. Once, and then I go back to being who I actually am. I remember thinking that so clearly, like I was two different people, and the real one was still waiting for me at home, patient, unbothered, and I just had to get through this one night before I could go back to her. I didn't understand yet that there wasn't a version of me waiting anywhere. There was just this one, making a choice, over and over. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet. I was 400 miles away, checking under Sam's bed for monsters, completely unaware that the thing I should have been worried about was already inside the house. Thursday, I picked up her dry cleaning, something I almost never did, and found a second suit jacket in the bag that I didn't recognize, not hers, a man's blazer, navy, a dry cleaning tag from a shop in Columbus stapled to the collar. I stood in the parking lot of the cleaners holding it like it might explain itself if I stared long enough. I didn't ask her about it that night either. I told myself it must belong to someone from her office, that maybe there'd been a mix-up at the cleaners, that these things happen. I hung it in the hall closet, behind our coats, where it would be easy not to see. I want to stop here for a second, because I think this is the part people misunderstand about men like me. It wasn't that I didn't notice things. I noticed everything. The receipt. The phone. The jacket. I noticed the way she'd started saying, "we," about her sales team in a warmer tone than she used for us. I just didn't let myself follow any of it to its conclusion, because conclusions require action, and action was never really my strong suit. I had spent years being good at the wrong things, at keeping the peace, at not asking, at making everything look fine from the outside, even to myself. Friday, her sister Kara came by to drop off a birthday gift for Ella, and something in the way Kara looked at Melissa when she thought I wasn't watching, quick, searching, almost apologetic, stuck with me longer than it should have. Kara had never been able to hide anything on her face. She'd been that way since we were all in our 20s, drinking cheap beer at Melissa's college apartment. Whatever she knew, she was carrying it badly. "Everything okay with you too?" I asked her, half joking, walking her to her car. "Why wouldn't it be?" Kara said, "Too fast," and got in without waiting for an answer. That weekend, Melissa mentioned, offhand, over coffee, like it barely mattered, that there was another conference coming up. Chicago this time. 3 days, maybe 4. Regional leadership, mandatory, she said, though when I asked to see the invite email, she said she'd forward it and never did. I checked our joint account that Sunday night, out of habit more than suspicion, just to make sure the mortgage payment had cleared. It had. But there was a withdrawal I didn't recognize sitting 3 lines above it, $4,000, transferred out 10 days earlier, no memo, no explanation, gone to an account I didn't have a name for. I sat there in the dark of my home office, the cursor blinking on the screen, and for the first time I let myself think the sentence all the way through instead of stopping halfway. Something was very wrong in my marriage, and I had no idea yet how deep it actually went. I didn't confront her about the $4,000. I told myself I wanted more information first, that showing my hand too early would only let her build a better story. That was the version I told myself. The truer version was that I was scared of what the answer might be, and scared, even more, of what I might have to do once I had it. So instead I did what I always do. I watched. Monday morning, she left for work in a blazer I hadn't seen before, tailored, sharper than her usual work clothes, and when I mentioned it, new jacket? She said Kara had passed it down, didn't fit her anymore. Kara is 4 inches taller than Melissa. I filed that away without saying anything, the way you file away a splinter you're not ready to dig out yet. At the office, my coworker Tom stopped by my desk with a printout of some structural calcs I needed to sign off on, and mentioned, almost in passing, that his wife had run into Melissa downtown last week, at the wine bar on 4th, the little one with the patio. Said she looked like she was celebrating something, Tom said, grinning. Good week for her? I said I wasn't sure. I hadn't known she'd been downtown at all that night. She'd told me she was working late. Tom didn't think anything of it. Why would he? He went back to his desk, and I sat there with the calcs in front of me, numbers I'd checked 100 times, unable to make a single one of them add up. That night at dinner, I asked her, as casually as I could manage, how her week had gone. Same as always, she said. Long boring. Nothing about the wine bar. Nothing about celebrating. I watched her cut Sam's chicken into smaller pieces, steady hands, easy voice, and felt the gap between what she was saying and what I now knew widen into something I couldn't ignore anymore. I still didn't ask directly. I told myself I was gathering the full picture before I said anything. That's what a rational person does, isn't it? Gather the facts, don't react emotionally. Looking back now, I think that was never really about being rational. It was about postponing the moment where I'd have to stop pretending, because once I asked the real question out loud, there'd be no version of our life where I hadn't asked it. Wednesday, Ella had a piano recital, one of those small school auditorium things where 40 parents pack into folding chairs and every kid butchers, for Elise, at a slightly different tempo. Melissa sat beside me, filming on her phone, and halfway through Ella's piece, her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down, I saw it, just for a second, a name I didn't recognize, no last name, just D, before she silenced it and slid it into her purse without a word. I didn't ask about it in the parking lot afterward. Ella was in the back seat glowing, replaying her own performance for us in exhausting detail, and it didn't feel like the moment. It never felt like the moment. That was becoming its own kind of pattern. Thursday I called the bank about the $4,000, using the excuse that I was reconciling our budget for taxes. The representative told me the transfer had gone to an account under Melissa's name alone, opened 8 months earlier, one I'd never known existed. 8 months. Not something recent. Not something impulsive. Something built, slowly, on purpose, while I was upstairs checking under Sam's bed for monsters that weren't there. I sat in my car in the office parking lot after that call for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself drive home. She told me later what that account had actually been for, and what those months had really looked like from where she was standing. I didn't know any of it yet. This is what she was carrying, alone, while I was still telling myself I was imagining things. I kept telling myself it was separate from the money we shared. That's what I told myself, anyway, like keeping it in its own account made it not really a lie. I wasn't hiding money to leave Adrian. I want that understood. I was hiding a version of myself I didn't think I was allowed to have anymore, someone who bought a hotel room dinner without asking permission first, who didn't have to explain every dollar to somebody else. It felt like breathing. God, that sounds insane now. It felt like the only room in my life where I wasn't somebody's wife or somebody's mother or somebody's regional sales director. I told myself that made it okay. I told myself a lot of things. That's what she told me, months after all of this. At the time, I only had a bank statement and a bad feeling in my chest that wouldn't quit. Friday, Kara called me directly, which she'd never done before in 14 years, always through Melissa, always a group text, never a one-on-one call. When I picked up, there was a pause on the line, long enough that I almost said hello twice. "Adrian," she said finally. "Is everything okay over there? With you and Mel? Why are you asking me that?" Another pause. No reason. Just checking in. Just checking. There it was again, that same phrase, the exact words Melissa had used the night I found the receipt, and something about hearing it from Kara's mouth instead landed harder than I expected. Two women in my life using the same evasive shorthand within the same week wasn't a coincidence. It was a rehearsed answer. Somebody had prepared her for this call, and I didn't think it had been me. "Kara," I said. "If there's something I should know." "There's nothing," she said, too quickly, the same way Melissa always said it. "I have to go, Adrian. I'll talk to you soon." She hung up before I could say anything else, and I stood in my kitchen holding a dead phone, staring at the hall closet where a stranger's blazer still hung behind our coats, and I understood, finally, that everyone around me seemed to know something I didn't, and that not one of them was going to be the one to tell me. I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me. That was the shift, quiet, almost imperceptible, but real. I stopped hoping the truth would arrive on its own and started going looking for it. It started small. I wrote down the name from Ella's recital, no last name, on a sticky note I kept folded in my wallet, the way you'd carry a receipt for something you weren't ready to throw away. I pulled up our cell plan online, the family account I managed, and found the itemized call log going back 3 months. There it was, over and over, a number that wasn't in our contacts, calls at odd hours, 9:47 p.m., 11:12 p.m., once at 6:03 in the morning while I was already at the gym. I didn't call the number. I wasn't ready for that yet. I just wrote it down next to the sticky note, another piece in a pile that was starting to have a shape. I told myself I was building a case the way I'd build a load analysis, data first, conclusions later, no room for feeling. It was easier to think of it that way. Numbers don't ask you to feel anything. People do. The following Tuesday, Melissa left for a team dinner that ran until almost midnight. I sat up in the den with the TV on mute, not watching it, just letting the light move across the room while I waited to hear her key in the door. When she finally came in, she smelled like a restaurant I didn't recognize, not our usual places, something with cedar and citrus in it, a different kind of cologne clinging faintly to her coat that wasn't hers and wasn't mine. "How was it?" I asked. "Fine. Long." She kissed the top of my head, already moving toward the stairs. "I'm exhausted." I sat there another 20 minutes after she'd gone up, turning that word over. Fine. Everything with her had become fine and long and nothing exciting, 3 words doing the work of an entire second life I wasn't allowed to see. I want to stop here for a second and admit something I'm not proud of. That same week, I went into her email. Not hacked, I didn't need to, we'd shared a password manager since before the kids were born, some leftover habit from when we trusted each other completely. I told myself I had every right, that a marriage doesn't have locked drawers. But some part of me knew that wasn't really true, that I was crossing a line she hadn't crossed with me, at least not yet, not that I'd caught her doing. I did it anyway. I found the hotel confirmation first. Columbus, the week of the sales conference, a suite, not a standard room, a suite, booked 2 days before the conference officially started and checked out 1 day after it ended. Booked under her name. Paid from the account with the $4,000. Then I found the messages. Not explicit, not the kind of thing you'd expect from a movie, worse, somehow, in their ordinariness. Can't stop thinking about last night. Miss you already and you just left. Tell A, you have a work call, I'll call you at 9. Signed off, every time, with a single letter. D. I sat with my laptop open on the kitchen table at 1 in the morning, the house silent except for the refrigerator humming, and I read those messages 3 times each, like repetition might change what they said. That was the moment. Looking back now, I understand it wasn't really about the messages themselves, it was that I finally had proof of what some part of me had already accepted weeks earlier. The proof didn't break something new. It confirmed something I'd already quietly buried. I didn't confront her that night. I closed the laptop, went to bed, and lay next to her while she slept, breathing slow and even, completely unaware that the man beside her now knew everything and had decided to say nothing yet. The next few days I moved through the house like a man cataloging a museum exhibit of his own life. I photographed the hotel confirmation. I screenshotted the messages, saved them to a drive that wasn't linked to anything she could access. I pulled the bank statements for the separate account and printed them, page by page, on the office printer at work, feeding them into a folder I kept locked in my desk drawer instead of bringing them home. Tom noticed I'd been quiet that week, asked if everything was okay over coffee in the break room. Just tired, I said. Long few weeks. You'd tell me if something was wrong, right? He said, half joking, the way men do when they suspect something is wrong and don't want to be the one to name it. I almost told him. I almost said all of it, right there over bad break room coffee, and I don't fully know why I didn't. Maybe some part of me still believed that saying it out loud to another person would make it permanent in a way that only I knowing it hadn't yet become. I understood something in that moment I hadn't let myself understand before. Silence isn't the absence of a decision, it's a decision itself. Every day I didn't say anything, I was choosing to keep living inside a version of my marriage I already knew wasn't real anymore. Friday night, Kara texted me. Not Melissa this time, me, directly, for the second time in 2 weeks, which told me almost as much as the message itself. Can we talk? Alone. It's important. We met at a diner off Route 9, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that's been on the burner too long. Kara sat across from me, hands wrapped around her mug, not drinking it, and I could see her working up to something the way you work up to jumping into cold water. I should have told you weeks ago, she said. I've hated myself every day I didn't. Tell me what, Kara. She looked at me for a long moment. His name is Derek. He's on her regional team. It's been going on since last summer. She paused, swallowed. There's more. I think you need to hear it from her, not me. But Adrian, there's more. I sat there in that booth with the folder of evidence still locked in my desk at work, $4,000 and a stranger's blazer and a name that finally had a full shape to it, and I understood that whatever came next wasn't going to be a conversation I could keep postponing. I didn't know it yet, but there's more would turn out to be the smallest part of what I still had to learn. I didn't tell her that night. I waited 2 days, not out of strategy exactly, more because I needed the folder in my desk drawer to feel less like a threat and more like something I could actually hold in front of her without my hands shaking. Sunday afternoon, the kids at a birthday party across town. I set the folder on the kitchen table where the receipt had once sat crumpled in her suitcase pocket, and I asked her to sit down. "You're scaring me," she said, half laughing, the way people do when they already sense the ground shifting under them. "Sit down, Melissa." She sat. I opened the folder and laid the hotel confirmation on the table first. Then the bank statement, the separate account circled in red pen. Then a printed screenshot, the messages signed with a single letter. My voice stayed level. I'd practiced that, without meaning to, lying awake for 2 nights rehearsing exactly how flat I could keep it. "Columbus," I said. "A suite, not a room. Booked 2 days early." I set down the next page. $4,000, an account I didn't know existed. Another page. "Derek." She went white. "Where did you?" "That's not the question you should be asking right now. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. Adrian, I can explain." "Then explain." She picked up the hotel confirmation, set it back down without really looking at it. "It was one dinner that went too long. That's all. We talked. It didn't mean anything. A suite doesn't happen by accident. The regular rooms were booked. I upgraded because it was available. For 4 nights. Booked 2 days before the conference even started." Silence. The refrigerator hummed behind her. I set down the next page. It wasn't the whole time. It was maybe twice. 3 times, tops. The messages go back 8 months. That doesn't mean anything happened every time we talked. Melissa. It's not what you're building it up to be in your head. Her voice was climbing now, thin at the edges. You don't understand what it's like being on the road constantly, being talked over in every meeting, and then someone actually sees you. Someone sees you. I put the last page down. Kara's name, written on a sticky note, the word more underlined twice. "Your sister came to see me Friday." Her face changed completely. Kara had no right. She said, "There's more." "What's more, Melissa?" She didn't answer right away. She was looking at the sticky note like it might bite her. "The money," she finally said, very quiet. "Some of it wasn't for me." "What does that mean?" Derek he owed people money. "Gambling, I don't know, I never asked the specifics. He needed help and she stopped herself. "It's not what you think. You gave him money. Our money. It was going to be temporary. He said he'd pay it back." "Did he?" She didn't answer that either, and the silence sat there long enough to be its own kind of answer. I sat back. Something in my chest that had been clenched for weeks finally let go of trying to stay calm about it, but what came out wasn't rage. It came out flat and cold, colder than I expected of myself. "I want to know everything. From the beginning. Not the version you've already rehearsed." She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face gave way, not a collapse exactly, more like a wall finally admitting it had never really held. "Fine," she said. "You want everything. Okay." She wrapped her arms around herself like the kitchen had gotten cold. "It started at a conference in April, over a year ago now. Not Columbus, before that. He sat with me at the bar because everyone else had gone up to their rooms, and he asked me a question nobody had asked me in years. He asked what I actually wanted. Not what the job wanted, not what you wanted, not what the kids needed, what I wanted. I didn't even have an answer. I just remember sitting there, 40 years old, not knowing what I wanted, and something about that terrified me more than anything he said after. I told myself it was nothing. One drink, one conversation, I go home the next day and it's over. That's what I told myself the first time he kissed me too, that it was a one-time thing, that it didn't count if I never let it happen again. I actually believed that. I think I needed to believe it. But then there was another conference. And another. And every time I told myself the same lie, this is the last one, and every time it got a little easier to believe it less. I started planning around seeing him without admitting to myself that's what I was doing. Booking flights a day early. Choosing conferences by whether he'd be there. I became someone who was good at lying, Adrian. Genuinely good at it. That should have scared me more than it did. The money, the account, I told myself I was just being smart, keeping something separate, in case. In case of what, I don't even know anymore. And then he needed help and I gave it because some part of me thought if I helped him enough, it would mean something. It would mean I mattered to someone the way I used to matter to you, before I became just the person who runs the house and closes the sales numbers and remembers everyone's dentist appointments. I couldn't look at the kids' drawings on the fridge some mornings. Ella's stupid magnet frog holding up her spelling test, I'd stand there with my coffee and not be able to look at it, because I knew what I'd done the night before, and that frog didn't know, and Sam didn't know, and you didn't know, and I was the only one carrying it, and some days it felt like it was going to come up out of my chest right there in the kitchen. I tried to stop once. Told him it was over, in February. Lasted 11 days. Her voice cracked on the number, small and specific in a way that somehow made it worse than anything else she'd said. I don't have a good excuse for going back. I just did. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I loved you, she said, quieter now. I want you to know that was never not true. I stopped feeling like myself somewhere in the middle of loving you, and I went looking for her in exactly the wrong place. I looked at the sticky note still sitting on the table, Derek, more, underlined twice, and I thought about 8 months, and a sweet, and a frog magnet on our refrigerator that I would never look at the same way again. Get out of the kitchen, I said. I need to think, and I can't do it with you sitting there. She didn't move at first. Then she did, quietly, and I sat alone at the table with the folder still open in front of me, understanding that whatever came next, there was no version of this that ended with us sitting at this same table the way we used to. I filed for divorce 11 days later. Not in anger, the anger had already burned through most of itself in that kitchen, but with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years, the way a fog finally lifts and you realize how long you'd been driving blind. Melissa moved into Kara's guest room that same week. She didn't fight me on the timeline, not at first, still too raw from having said all of it out loud for the first time. But 3 months in, when the lawyers started dividing what we'd built, something in her shifted back into the version of herself that bargained instead of the one that confessed. You don't have to take everything, she said, on the phone one night after Sam was asleep. Adrian, please. The house, Ella's whole life is in that house. You should have thought about Ella's whole life 8 months ago. I didn't say it cruelly. I said it the way you'd state a fact about a load-bearing wall. This is simply what's true now, whether or not you like the shape of it. The financial side of things wasn't complicated once the separate account came into evidence. For $1,000, moved out of a joint account without my knowledge, most of it never repaid by the man on the other end of it, that detail alone shifted how her lawyer approached the whole negotiation. I kept the house. I kept primary custody, with Melissa getting Wednesdays and alternating weekends. I kept the retirement accounts largely intact, because a judge in Millbrook doesn't look kindly on money quietly funneled to someone else's gambling debts. Melissa kept her job, for a while, until word made its way through the regional office, the way these things always do, and by summer she'd been quietly moved to a smaller territory with a smaller title and a much smaller number of people asking about her weekends. Derek didn't last past April. I heard about it secondhand, through Kara, who'd become, strangely, one of the more honest people in my life by the end of all this. He'd been transferred to a different region not long after the affair became office knowledge, and from what Kara said, he stopped returning Melissa's calls almost immediately once the excitement of it, the secrecy, the stolen hours in Columbus hotel suites, had nothing left to hide behind. There was no dramatic confrontation, no reckoning with his own wife or family that I ever heard of. He simply wasn't there anymore, the way certain people aren't built to stay for the parts that cost something. I used to think I'd want to know all of that, every consequence, every domino falling. When it actually happened, I found I mostly didn't care. It had already stopped being about him. Looking back now, I can name the moments I should have asked the harder question sooner: the receipt I put back exactly where I found it, the jacket I hung behind the coats instead of holding up and asking whose it was, the phone turned face down that I let pass because Sam needed more macaroni. Every one of those was a door I chose not to open. I used to think that made me patient. I understand now it just made me absent from my own life for longer than I needed to be. There's a specific kind of quiet that settles into a house once the fighting is over and the truth has already been said out loud. Maybe you know it, the first night alone in a bed that used to have someone else's breathing in it, and instead of the grief you braced for, there's just space. Room to exhale in a way you didn't know you'd been holding. I started sleeping through the night again sometime that summer. I'd forgotten what that felt like, waking up without already replaying a conversation I hadn't had yet. Ella asked me once, months later, driving home from her piano recital, she'd finally nailed, for Elise, not a single stumble, whether I was sad about the divorce. I told her the truth, the simplified version a 9-year-old could hold on to, that some things break in a way you can't fix by trying harder, and that it's not weakness to stop trying to fix something that was never going to hold. She thought about that for a while, staring out the window, and then said, "I like Wednesdays with just you better anyway," and went back to humming her piece under her breath like she hadn't just said the truest thing anyone had said to me in months. I could have stayed angry. For a while, I did. But somewhere in that year, I chose not to keep carrying it, and that was the only kind of winning that ever actually mattered. I wasn't the same man who'd stood frozen in that kitchen holding a folded receipt, too afraid to ask what it meant. I was quieter now, but steadier, the kind of steady that doesn't need anyone else's permission to keep standing. There's a moment, maybe once a week, when I catch myself glancing at Ella's frog magnet still stuck to the fridge, holding up whatever spelling test or crayon drawing has replaced the last one, and I don't feel what I used to feel looking at it. I just feel like a man standing in his own kitchen, in his own life, finally all the way present in it. That's my story, a folded receipt, a stranger's blazer behind the coats, a frog magnet that means something different now than it used to. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. If any part of this sounded like your own life, tell me in the comments. I read every one, and I'd genuinely love to hear your story too. See you in the next one. What looked, for months, like a marriage quietly working was actually two people privately managing separate emergencies and calling it peace. Adrian's conflict avoidance and Melissa's fear of becoming invisible weren't opposing forces in this story, they were the same silence, worn by two different people, for two different reasons, until the silence itself became the marriage's actual architecture. The accumulation here matters more than any single decision. It wasn't the affair alone that ended the marriage, it was 14 years of a household where neither partner had built a habit of saying the hard thing early, while it was still small. Melissa's unmet need for visibility didn't appear the week she met Derek, it had likely been forming since long before. In every meeting where she felt talked over, every year she became a little more the person who runs the house, and a little less anyone's idea of a whole person. That doesn't excuse what she did. But it explains why the door, once opened, didn't stay open by accident. Adrian's growth in this story isn't about becoming someone who confronts easily, he never fully does, even at the end. It's about learning that silence has a cost, and that avoiding conflict doesn't prevent damage, it just delays who pays for it and how much interest accrues in the meantime. The marriage didn't collapse in that kitchen scene. It had already ended months earlier, in 100 small moments neither of them said out loud. The confrontation was simply the point where the truth finally caught up to what had already stopped existing. What stays with me most about a story like this isn't the affair itself, it's how ordinary the warning signs looked at the time. A phone turned face down. A jacket that didn't fit right. A phrase repeated a little too casually. None of it screamed. All of it whispered, and whispers are easy to talk yourself out of hearing. Maybe that's the real question worth sitting with, not whether you'd notice the big, obvious betrayal, but whether you'd let yourself notice the small, quiet ones, the ones that are still easy, right now, to pretend you didn't see.